This is Regained Wellness Podcast with Jamie Logie, episode 122, Trans Fats.
Word to your mother.
Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Jamie Logie. I run regainedwellness.com, and this is the Regained Wellness Podcast of the same name. And if it's your first time here, thanks so much for coming out. We appreciate it. You can go back. I got a bunch of shows. If you haven't gone through them already, I've got every nutrition and fitness topic you can think about. Lots of good interviews with some of the best experts in nutrition. I've got some top food bloggers. I've interviewed contestants who are on Top Chef, Master Chef. A pro wrestler makes an appearance. So yeah, take your time and look back. If you're listening usually I do shows once a week. For the summer, I spread them out a bit. It's every couple weeks. Just things sort of slow down, and I think that works out well. And like I said, there's lots you can go back and listen to. So if you're, just kicking it for the summertime and, you're at the beach or you're just even in your backyard, that's the beauty of podcasts is they go anywhere you go. So yeah, like I said, if you're on vacation or driving or flying or biking or whatever, I can be right there with you. It's like we're taking a co-vacation. And like I said, so if you make sure to subscribe, you just automatically get the show sent to you. So if you're on, usually iTunes is the way to go, but I'm on, Stitcher Radio, Google Play Music, pretty much anywhere you'd find a podcast, I should be there. Like the Jackson 5s, I should be there. And today I've talked about this a bit before, the whole trans fat issue, but it's a little, just a quick kind of almost like a refresher on really what trans fats are and why we want to stay away from them. You're probably very aware of them. They are, pretty vilified now, and for good reason. And, like I said, it doesn't hurt to kind of go over this again and just, re-educate yourself or educate yourself for the first time if this is new information. So I'll try and break it down succinctly and cover everything, and then you can get on with your day. So there's a lot of interesting stuff out there about trans fats, and it's good that it's really come more to the public's attention. And now that we are, they're making them illegal, like that should say enough right there. So let's get right into it. So here in kind of trans fats 101, if you've consumed a lot of foods that have come in packages or boxes or, commercial baked goods, not necessarily like local or, smaller shop type bakery baked goods, but, anything that's overly manufactured, if the product has a commercial for it in some form, you've probably consumed trans fats. But what is a trans fat? So trans fats have always been known as partially hydrogenated oils, basically vegetable oil, hydrogenated vegetable oil. And that's how they used to be listed on ingredients. They are now classified as trans fats and basically come from vegetable oils that have been hydrogenated. So what that is the process of adding hydrogen atoms to a liquid substance so that they remain solid at room temperature. So in the case of a trans fat, they're taking a vegetable oil, which are not good to start with, but the problem with vegetable oils is, like soybean or canola or stuff like that, is they are a refined extraction from a natural source. And when you start to super refine things, that's when you get into problems. And it's the case with sugar. Like if you have sugar cane or beets, it's different in that source. But when it's refined down, when you take the sugar out of it, that's when it becomes more harmful. And another example would probably be, we probably all know that cocaine is probably not a good thing for us to consume unless you're Lindsay Lohan or someone like that. But they come from the coca leaf, and if you use the coca leaf, they make teas out of them. They can actually ward off altitude sickness. They use them in like the Andes and places like that, and you can get them in various forms. That way, not so bad. But when it's refined and extracted, that's where cocaine comes from, and then that can cause quite a few health problems. This goes back to the Coke and cocaine issue. When Coke was first created, that's where the name Coca Cola comes from. Coca means from the coca leaf, and cola is actually spelled with a K normally. It's a cola nut, and it's got some of the natural caffeine sources and the flavors. And the coca leaf as well too was kind of originally in there sort of for flavor and stuff like that. But they would use coca leaves, like real ones, that would have trace amounts of actual cocaine. So it was not like they were putting cocaine into original Coca-Cola, but it was, tiny trace amounts. So you could say it was in there, but not that much. After a while, they went to using what's called spent coca leaves. So there was no trace substances. And then in this day and age, they use like a synthetic coca flavor, but that's the whole idea. So that's basically when you start refining things down, that's when the problems happen. And that's the problem with vegetable oils straight up, is when they're that, like, corn on its own, not too bad. When it's refined down into corn oil or canola or soybean, this is like rocket fuel. It's so concentrated and it causes such inflammation in the body. There's higher omega-6 ratios. I mean, it's like it lights everything up. The idea with inflammation is, if you cut your finger or you get a sliver or splinter or whatever, and, it reddens, it heats up, that's inflammation happening. It's a good thing, it serves a function, but this can be happening internally, but you don't necessarily feel it. But it's causing a lot of chronic problems, and that's what inflammation is, and that's what happens from the refining process. So to make it a step, way worse, when you hydrogenate, when you add in those hydrogen atoms to this liquid substance, it just compounds the problems. So what they're doing this for is taking vegetable oil, which, when it's liquid, it's tougher to work with. When it's more solid and it's it stays solid at room temperature, it's much more usable. And it's also super cheap as well too. So why, what's the other reasons you'd want to turn something from a liquid to a solid? When you have a substance in a solid form, it's more pliable, and it's adjustable for different situations. So in the case of what we're looking at here in food, it allows for higher temperature baking while still providing a nice browning effect. When people were kind of getting away from, there's the movement into kind of low fat foods and removing, fat from things, but they're trying to make up the texture changes and like the mouthfeel and whatever. And they would use things like high fructose corn syrup, and then they want to add back in a different, without using, say, natural butters or whatever. And then they come along with the idea of making trans fats. So then they can make these products a little more like they usually tasted before they removed some of those different ingredients. And the thing with trans fats is they could actually make more of them faster because they could cook or produce at super high temperatures. So they could just ram this stuff through super fast. And like I said, it makes it still look like it was baked, like lovingly in a kitchen. It gives that good browning color on it. And the main thing is they can tolerate extreme high heats for deep frying. So very good for fast food places, chain restaurants, which do a lot of, that's the thing. If you go to somewhere like, trying to think, like Applebee's or something like that, that's a big name chain place. This is essentially fast food as well too. A lot of this stuff is coming in boxed form, super high heated, fried. And that's where something like trans fats are good, because they can use the super high temperatures, get this food out quicker. So you're not, if you've been to a good restaurant, a good meal can take 45 minutes to an hour, but at a chain restaurant, not even including fast food, but like at a chain place, food's out within 20 minutes because it can go this super, super high temperature because of the trans fat. So probably the most important reason they create this process, or they use trans fats in all their manufacturing and packaging based foods and fast foods and whatever, is because it has a super long shelf life. First off, these trans fats are so cheap to produce. Sorry. And you can create products that can stay on shelves for a much longer period of time. So there's less waste and lower overhead costs overall because they're not having to replace this stuff like bags of cookies or whatever. They can stay on the shelves for months and months, and they probably do, even longer. Who knows how long some of those things go for. And that's really one of the main purposes of trans fat. It's almost like a preservative in a disgusting way in how it can keep this extended shelf life. So with trans fats, the food designers they're really able to, like I was talking about, to manipulate that mouthfeel and the texture of foods. And that's a large part of what makes food appeal and not appeal to us is texture. Well, usually if you don't like something, it's not necessarily that you don't like the flavor of it. Like in my case, tomatoes. You could hold a gun to my head and I'm not going to eat a tomato. And it's not necessarily the flavor, it's the texture to me that is tough. Some people have that with like mushrooms or fruit, whatever it is. That's usually what it comes down to. It's not that you dislike what you're tasting. It's just the mouthfeel of it that really throws you off. So that's what food designers know, that they can create at good mouthfeel. That we tend to like things that are a little more on the kind of not just fattier, but richer, smoother thing, mouthfeel, like, ice creams and peanut butters. That's the general people respond to as far as when I talk about mouthfeel, and kind of what they desire and kind of what they crave a little bit. So like I said, just think right now of the stuff that you don't like, and it's usually because of that whole texture issue. So we move into looking at, walking down a grocery store aisle, and you see all those colored packaged foods. They kind of override our senses. They have to really stand out on the shelves. They make, the cereal boxes make kids go ballistic, or whatever snack-based treat it is. It's kind of, that's just our regular day-to-day thing. We're exposed to these trans fats all the time, but it's not that recent of a thing. Hydrogenation goes back quite a long way. So this isn't something that just, started in the 80s or whatnot, though it really did accelerate and rapidly expand the use of trans fats and into the 90s a little bit more. But the first use of hydrogenation goes back to 1909 and is done by Procter and Gamble. They kind of basically invented this whole idea of hydrogenation. In 1911, they introduced what most people have seen and used before, Crisco. They introduced that to the market, and that really changes forever the way people would bake and prepare foods. So Crisco was made from hydrogenating, in this case, cottonseed oil, and is actually where we get the name Crisco. So it's modified from crystallized cottonseed oil. So they take those four words. So from the crystallized cottonseed oil. So it's like that kind of combination, Crisco. And it's been, used ever since then, but not on, it wasn't used on a mass kind of production stage as things are now. So the idea then, what is it that makes trans fats dangerous? So like I said, it's kind of that whole idea of the inflammation in the body and kind of changing how our body responds as far as that, like that internal inflammatory response. It's like trans fats are a foreign invader. It's just something that our body does not recognize, and it doesn't really know how to process it. So essentially turn into sludge in your arteries. Like think about old motor oil does in a car. This is basically what trans fats are doing. So it makes them a very real threat for coronary heart disease. And then from there, it can increase your risk of, cancers, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, obesity, liver dysfunction, linked to infertility in women, even just things like depression and cognitive function, because your brain needs cleaner fats. I mean, your brain is fat. 80% of your brain is fat, but the omega-3s are what make up the majority of that structure of the brain. And there's where you get omega-3s from are good sources like different grass-fed beefs, olive oil, avocados, just all that sort of stuff. The difference is with like the trans fats is it just can cause those cognitive issues just because your brain isn't getting or made up of those proper fats. And then the problem is the trans fats hit you with a double whammy in regard to the coronary heart disease, because they also lower your good HDL cholesterol and then elevate the bad LDL cholesterol. And had been doing this for a while, though no one was really looking at these effects until around the 1940s. So they start to correlate between trans fats and cancer in the 1940s. And it was not until 1988 where that connection with the coronary heart disease was made. Slowly but surely they're starting to chip away at why so many people are getting sick and all these health problems. I mean, there's lots of different factors. It's when you correlate something, it doesn't mean it's the straight cause of, but it is in relation. So at the very least, it's not helping as, sugar intake goes up, lack of exercise, increased stress levels, other, bad dietary inclusions. So, I mean, it does play a role, whether it's completely responsible or not is tough to pinpoint, but, it shows up in all these issues with the coronary heart disease and whatnot. In the mid 90s, again, they were now starting to associate trans fats with causing upwards of 30,000 deaths a year, and primarily from heart disease. The problem is the USDA was still continuing to promote them up until 2005. Just not not shutting down this whole concept of using trans fats, just kind of allowing them to be used free reign, not monitoring the whole situation. And in 2006, they were estimating that the death count was approaching 100,000 people a year. Obviously there can be other factors. If you look at, these people could still be smoking, they could be drinking a lot, but definitely not helping, if not potentially causing all these issues. So like I mentioned, how can you avoid them? If you spent your life eating packaged, processed, boxed fast foods, like I said, you're pretty sure you've consumed trans fats at some point. So that generally, here's where they're found. As of right now, if you wanted to identify what contains a trans fat, basically cookies, crackers, cakes, store-bought pie crusts, store-bought pizza doughs, some breads, various margarines and shortening, pre-mixed items such as cake and pancake mix, pretty much all fried foods, a lot of chips. They're moving away from them a lot now, trans fats. A lot of candy, microwave and movie popcorn. That's a brutal source of them. Movie popcorn especially, man, the stuff they put on that is, I mean, you can be looking at thousands of calories just in one movie popcorn serving. Frozen packaged dinners traditionally would contain them. Like I said, it's changing now where you see on bags like zero trans fats. Like that's what I'm talking about here. That movement is happening, and the understanding of getting away from these things is more prevalent. It's good, but this is traditionally where you would find trans fats. So now you have to be even more careful when you read food labels. So that, trans fats are not going to be listed specifically as trans fats, but if you see different terms like that hydrogenated term, that's the same thing. So some manufacturers are they will work their way around that as far as how they identify what's in it in maybe different, in a different sort of context, but it's still the same thing. That's the thing. If you notice, many foods will have their nutrition information listed, but then say, it provides multiple servings, even though you're holding a single item. You might be just as an example, like you're holding whatever package and it says this is, contains this much, but it actually is like 4 servings or whatever. And you're only looking at the one. They can break it down into servings. And if the trans fats fall below a certain amount, they don't have to list them. So that's one of the reasons why, you're holding a single item. And you're like, why is this multiple, servings? Why wouldn't they just put the information on what is in this one individual product? And that's usually the reason why, because when they break it down into smaller measurements, they don't have to list trans fats. So that's one of the ways they've been getting around it for years. In the US, if a food has less than 0.5 grams in a serving, the label can legally read 0 grams. And that's a problem if you're, eating stuff like this all the time, every day. This is when it adds up. You might be thinking, oh, I'm getting nothing. That's, just one of the ways. That's why it's so important to read ingredients and look out for those terms. Hydrogenated is going to be your first tip off point. And I mean, the more ingredients you see that you can't pronounce or you've never heard of before, it's probably better to stay away from it. So, I mean, that's why the best strategy when it comes to your food is keeping it as real as possible. When you avoid packaged and processed crap, you're going to be avoiding this man-made garbage called trans fat. Like when you pick up, the way to look at it is you shouldn't be eating food that has a list of ingredients. Real food is the ingredients in what you're making. If you're eating something that has a nutritional profile in the back and a list of what it contains, it's not a real food. In some cases you can find that's not across the board. There can be good, packaged stuff that you can get, locally or whatever. So it doesn't mean always the case, but if it's coming out of a container or in the frozen food section or boxed form or whatever, and that's when you're looking at a whole list of stuff that you might not be aware of, that you're intaking. Whereas compared to, if you pick up a cucumber in a grocery store, there's not a list of the nutrition information on it because it's just straight real whole food. So if you're eating a lot of, like I said, if it comes out of package, at least be aware of the ingredient lists. Watch out for those multiple servings per item, just so you know how much you're taking in. Remember, keep it as real as possible. Or if it does have ingredients, make sure it has a limited amount of ingredients. You can still find okay things that might, but better off to have, 3 or 4 ingredients compared to 60 or something like that. And the more ingredients it has, it's more like, say, a packaged food or drink or whatever, it lists 25 ingredients. It's honestly probably more like 60 ingredients, because when it gets up that high, a lot of the individual, names that or they use or whatever can actually contain dozens of ingredients just within that one additive itself, but they don't have to list it. Like, if you always use this example, but a Burger King strawberry milkshake has it, I think it only lists like 7 ingredients or something like that, and one of them being artificial flavoring, an artificial or natural flavoring. But in that one listing, there's 56 different ingredients that go into just that, and none of them being a natural strawberry flavor. So it's just, the more things you start seeing on a package, you can be pretty sure it's double or triple the amount of things that are actually in it. So ideally, it's as small as possible with ingredients and names that you recognize, or ideally going for the cleanest, most natural whole foods you can find. And that's why, if you're in a grocery store, shopping in the perimeter of the store is where you're going to find all those things that don't have ingredients, because they are the ingredients to whatever you're going to be making up. So that's kind of the quick overview again on trans fats. It's, pretty damaging stuff. And like I said, there's been more of a movement away from it. There's starting to be illegal that, no packaging or your manufacturers can be using them within a few years, and that'll be like straight across the board. And, the companies that were aware of the public's interest in avoiding these things, that's why you see more, zero trans fats. But I think like as we're moving in 2017 now and moving on forward, these will be just straight up banned altogether, because they are so horrific and caused a lot of issues over the years. So that's pretty much everything. If you want to see more of the show notes on some of the different stuff I've referenced and talked about and just a little more detail, if you go to regainedwellness.com/122, I'll link up all the different stuff. There's a ton of different studies I have that you can look at as far as, related to like that coronary heart disease issue. A lot of those studies coming out of the 40s, in the 90s, when they started to see what was happening as far as heart disease and the elevation of the bad LDLs and lowering your good, all this stuff. So it's just, if you want a little more information, so regainedwellness.com/122. So that's kind of like the after party, if you will, the show after the show, just for a little more insight into the whole thing. So that's it for me. Thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe. And if you haven't already, also subscribe to the Regain Wellness email newsletter. If you want to get an email from me every couple of weeks where I cover, different issues, like this trans fat thing, but maybe a little more in depth, or a little more insights into, all sorts of relevant health, fitness, all that sort of stuff, information, and primarily stuff I only share over email. And if you go to regainedwellness.com/guide, you can sign up there. And when you do sign up, you get a free short ebook that's a little more in depth on, foods you want to be including in your diet and why. And a little more breakdown as well on these things to avoid, trans fats being in there, a little more information on things like, refined sugars or high fructose corn syrup and stuff. It sort of breaks that down a bit, why you want to be avoiding those. It's got some recipes. Yeah, get you all set. So that's regainedwellness.com/guide. That's it for me. Thanks for listening. I'll see you soon.